building, it's worth $1.8 million today. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Real estate taxes haven't changed. Walgreens has been the stable tenant. There's been no red flag to the assessor, and taxes are $22,000. Walgreens pays the taxes. Now the building sells for $1.9 million on a 5.5 cap. Solid for an investor, great profit for an owner. And Walgreens goes, wait a minute, I'm getting hosed here because taxes just went from 22 to 51, and the lease requires Walgreens in this scenario to pay the increase in the taxes because they solely pay the real estate taxes in that deal. Yeah.
Now, question: if they're locked into a 10-year lease, is that how the renewals work? Do they go in like big increments or like that, or is it every year after the initial sale?
I'm going to give you a spectrum of answers.
Okay.
It's negotiable.
Okay.
So you may have a Walgreens lease that's flat for 10 years, and so when you get to the 10th year, rents have gone from $8 to $15 a foot, and Walgreens goes, wait, no, we're a national tenant, we want to stay for another 20 years, so let's make a negotiated settlement at 12, and then move forward. You have no risk, no turnover costs, no leasing fees. Most leases have some annual increase built into the base rent, whether it's CPI, Consumer Price Index, whether it's a fixed 2.5%, 3% annualized increase. The negative to a tenant with a 3% annual increase over a 10-year term is you could be way over market. So you did a lease in 2014 at $1,000, and you have 3% annual increases. Okay, that property today, it's an office building, it's a retail building. That lease maybe $850 because that's today's market. You've paid a lot more money than market because of your long-term stability and your increases that are built into the lease. And again, it's spreadsheet analysis. Some tenants have gone back and tried to renegotiate their increases or flatline them or prepay, give an owner cash to avoid having those increases. Here's what we think it would be, or here's half of what it is today. What's the value of cash? I'll pay you $1,000 today, wipe out my increases for the next 4 years. I'm going to take the risk. I think I'm ahead. You can go invest your money. So it's whatever is negotiable, but in commercial, I would say you're probably looking at more of a 2 to 3% annualized increases. People got away from CPI in the last 10 years, although that might not be a bad thing right now.
What's CPI?
Consumer Price Index. Okay, I want to be respectful for anybody that had a time frame because it's supposed to be an hour. So if you have to go, I understand that. And again, this was a 2-hour session that I'm trying to whip through in an hour. Office leases. Under types of leases, brokerage fees. In office leasing, you get a lease fee. In residential, you lease a house, you lease a condo, you get paid by the cooperating brokerage company, and you get that up front. Normally shortly after the tenant takes possession, maybe even get paid before that. In my world, you usually get paid 30 days after the tenant takes possession. So you may negotiate a lease 6 months in advance. Everything's lined up. You don't get to invoice for it until the tenant takes possession, and then it's a big company. They've got an accounting department in Denver, Dallas, Detroit. You'll get paid in 30 to 60 days. So you can't expect immediate cash flow for the transactions that you're doing. And that I would say that's probably very standard in office, retail, and industrial. Office lease terms, rental rate, again, that kind of, we've covered that between base rent, triple net lease versus modified gross rent, which is the grossed up, and then you pay the percentages above that. Build out allowance. So in office, a landlord, or retail, a landlord oftentimes will give the tenant money to customize the space for their use. It's a negotiation of the term of the lease, the credit of the tenant. If I have Walgreens coming in, I'm happy to put up $200,000 and have them pay me back at 6% over the term of the lease. They're a New York Stock Exchange company. If I have Subway coming in, I want to know what the financials are of the franchise operator who's coming in. Is it a new person who's got a shell corporation that's the tenant? Is it an operator of 10, 15, 20 existing stores, and so their credit is a much more comfortable position for me to advance funds? Where's the risk-reward ratio that's going to go on there? But that's called TI, or tenant improvement allowance. Operating expenses, I think we covered that. That's the building operating costs. Term of the lease. Commercial typically is going to be a minimum of 2, more typically 3 to 5. If you're getting into larger properties, 3 to 10, versus, I would think, the world that most of you are in, which are annual or maybe 2-year leases. I office in Lincoln Park, and I'm hearing the residential rental people say many landlords have segued to 2-year lease minimums now, because the cost for the turnover is losing almost 2 months' rent between a 1-month leasing fee, administrative fees that most of the companies now charge, cleaning, painting, minor repairs, and so let's spread that out over a longer period of time. Let's amortize that over a 2-year term. And there's not a lot of kickback going on for that. So just, again, passing that on for your purposes. Due diligence, what is it? What does it cover? It's the investigation of the property for whatever you think is appropriate. If you want to bring in an environmental firm to test for asbestos, if you've got 9x9, you got a building that was built in the 60s, hasn't been renovated, and you've seen 9x9 tiles in the kitchen, on the stairs, there's a strong likelihood that those are going to be asbestos, or the glue that they put them down with is asbestos glue, mastic glue. That's an environmental hazard, and you have to have that cleaned up professionally. You don't want to mess with it. And for sure, don't go chip a piece off to take it and get it tested. Or you go into the basement and there's old shed carpeting down there. You probably want to pick up the corner of the carpet and see what's under it, because that shed carpet may tell you that that was done in the 60s, and what's under it was simply covered, and you have an environmental problem in the basement. That's a friend of mine. He didn't understand what environmental was until we basically...
Or white pipe wrap. That is
asbestos pipe wrap, yeah. So you want to have inspectors from a variety of types of companies. Residential, we've all gotten used to having a home inspector come in, and they know to look for that. In my world, somebody may say, Uncle Charlie is a general contractor, and my friend's a plumber, and I'm going to have him come in and look at the bathroom because I want to put a shower in, because a bunch of my folks bike to work, and I want to be able to let them clean up and not, sit over in the corner and reek. And I'm just giving you first-person stories here. Friend of mine's a roofer, and came to find out he's an unlicensed roofer and got arrested while he was on the roof. So now the roof's half torn off, and they're scrambling like mad to go find a replacement roofer. Make sure that you are trying to work with people, or have your clients work with people who are not necessarily license bonded, top of the line, but have the business abilities and licensing that is required for your local communities. Environmental issues, phase one. Phase one environmental report is where a company comes in and does surface testing. So they're going to go out to the parking lot and see if there's any areas that are heavy staining. If it's a gas station, they're going to look for staining in the concrete. They're going to look at the drains to see if anything's been poured down the drains. It's an automotive shop, and they've been doing your oil changes for years, and instead of putting it in that 55-gallon drum, they just go glug. Maybe it's an industrial building and there's a bunch of 55-gallon drums out back. Those probably have to be cleaned up properly. That's a phase one. Phase two is where they actually do the drilling. They come in and they pour the concrete. They drill holes in the parking lot or in the gravel parking areas. They're looking in historical records to see if there may be buried tanks or any other environmental issues, not just at that property, but for any surrounding properties. Did an industrial property 10 years ago, and there was a gas station 3 doors down. Nothing had sold in the intervening 2 other properties, and we came to find out that the leaking underground gas tank was a downhill slope, had actually leaked, and the underground soil was contaminated under the two buildings between and under part of the property that my client was looking at buying. And as much as they loved the building, there wasn't a lender on this planet that was going to loan to them. And the other two properties found out and were livid because their intrinsic values went to zero, or even worse, because the cleanup cost to move the building, clean the dirt up underneath it, destroyed the value that they had. So that's why you do a phase 1 or a phase 2 environmental to find out if there's any contamination. You don't want to buy a property that has more cost to clean up than is the value of what you're buying.
So I know that's usually done if you're getting a loan, right? Because, the bank wants to know that. Now, if it's a cash sale, do you suggest?
Totally.
Because God forbid
Quick
you're
story.
ever going to
Quick
receive
digression story. Get a phone call from a manager outside of my company, but somebody who I knew from years ago, who said, I have a problem, and I know I have a problem. I have a broker coming in, he's giving me paperwork to close next week. It's a 50,000 square foot industrial building. I don't know the first thing about it. What am I supposed to know? And I said, okay, for one, remember the conversation about it's outside the MLS? I said, who's the other broker? Cushman & Wakefield. Is there a commission letter? The broker says, what's that? So I said, get on bended knee, call the Cush managing broker, tell him you can't find the paperwork, can you please send you a replacement letter, and pray he's a good guy. That was okay. I said, how about the inspection? No inspection was done. How about the environmental? No environmental was done because the residential agent had no concept of what that was, so never told the client, who was an out-of-country buyer, to do that. And so the liability to their company is now massive, because if there's a suit, everybody's getting sued. So I said, do you have that to the agent, who's now crying on the telephone? I said, do you have this in writing that they waived their inspection and their environmental? She goes, I didn't even know you're supposed to do that. I said, okay, you know what Article 11 is of the National Association of Realtors? And she goes, what's that? I said, okay, you're supposed to have knowledge and expertise in what you do. And obviously you were in this for the $23,000 commission and could care less about the ethics of representing your client properly, to which point she called me several, 6, 7, I think an 8-letter words. And I said, you're the one that's in the front line for the lawsuit. Your E&O insurance doesn't cover you. Did you know that? So for those of you who may not realize it, managing brokers, I'm sure you do, most companies in your independent contractor agreements have language that says if you do anything with the words industrial or commercial, E&O insurance does not cover you unless you have them in writing authorizing the transaction that you're doing. So you might want to go back and read your E&O letters that you got years ago that you probably have no idea what it says. Luigi, I'm going to pick on you for a moment. Does your independent contractor agreement cover your residential agents?
I use for my franchise, it does.
It does.
It does.
Okay.
Commercial. Right?
Okay. So I stand here partially corrected. But many of them, like my companies, does not. You have to have your managing broker know what you're doing and sign off on anything that's outside of your Class 1 activity. Class 1, again, is residential 1 to 4. So just be aware that you walk a fine line, and that's why the analogy was, yes, you should always have an inspection. You're protecting your client first. You're protecting you and your brokerage second by making sure that they have inspections, they have environmentals, and if they don't, that you have a signature where they've waived off on that. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the best takeaway some of you will have today. Mm-hmm. Okay, real estate syndication, putting investment groups together. There's, a dozen people in the room. Everybody's got $10,000 because they're successful agents. We have $120,000 to go out and buy a piece of real estate with. I'm the sponsor. I like half-baked shopping centers because we can buy them for 6% returns, spend the next year and a half rehabbing them and getting them re-rented. I've got a strategy on how to make your tenants comfortable and happy while you get the vacancy fixed and you take your 6 or 7% returns up to 12 or 14% returns. Served me well over the last 25 years of doing this. But you've got money that you don't even think about. If you see a great opportunity, most brokers die broke. They do out their business, they send their kids to college, and they may or may not save money for themselves. You see a great deal. You call your favorite client and say, have I found a deal for you? It's a foreclosure, it's an estate sale, it's a hoarder. you should buy this. I know you'll love doing this. And you make your $7,000, $17,000, $23,000 commission, and they make $82,000. Okay, stop. Why did you let that slip through your fingers? You've got people in your office that have funds. You've got family and friends. You can call me. You should be out there growing your own estate, growing your own portfolio for your retirement, for your cash flow. Don't let things like that slip through your fingers. Rethink sometimes how you're looking at great opportunities that you stumble across in your day-to-day business activity, and capitalize it for yourself. It may be the biggest asset you've ever done. Put a group together. We'll call this Thursday Morning Investors. Let's go out and buy that house or that townhouse together, find a contractor, fix it up, turn around, flip it. How many people do you hear have done fix and flips for the last decade and they make money at it? You see stuff every day. I'd like to see you profiteer from that same philosophy. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in 2 seconds. And now I'll stick around for a while if people have questions. Zoning, if you're doing something in the commercial world and your client wants to adaptively reuse a building, call the zoning department of the municipality and make sure that they can do that. You have a retail store that somebody wants to use for a dog daycare center. Will the municipality allow that to happen? You've got a vacant CVS that someone wants to come in and turn into a medical center because it's on a hard corner, a stoplight corner, doesn't have enough parking. Call the zoning department, call the economic development department. There may be money that the municipality has for improvements to buildings within their community that you wouldn't have otherwise known about. Call the mayor's office. Let them know what you're trying to do and make sure that it's okay, because you'd hate to get way down the road and have the client spend a bunch of money on architects and attorneys and all kinds of other costs for development and find out at the 11th hour that they can't do it because the zoning board of appeals isn't going to allow it, because you have to make changes and go before the zoning department, and if you need variances you go before the ZBA. I've been the chairman of the ZBA in my home community for about 10 years, and it's heartbreaking to turn people down. They come with visions and dreams and hard-spent money and make these beautiful presentations, and you got to say no. RPR, I don't know if any of you use it. That's part of the National Association of Realtors book of tools. It has a commercial side to it as well as the residential side. You can flip back and forth, and it's a world of knowledge and information and resources if you're trying to understand a little bit more about the commercial side, find listings. You use the MLS. I use the MLS about 40% of the time. CoStar, LoopNet, Property Line, RPR, Quantum Listings, CRE, Commercial Real Estate Collaborative are all real estate databases that I participate in, pay to be in some cases, that are outside of the MLS, but they have office, retail, and industrial properties for lease and for sale. The big companies, the Cushman Wakefields, the JLLs, the Marcus and Millichaps of the world are not realtors. They don't participate in the MLS, and you will typically never see their listings unless you go look and search long and hard for them. So there's a whole world out there of other resources that the commercial real estate world uses, and if you need more information on how to connect with them, I'm happy to tell you that outside of this. Anybody have any questions? Because I talk fast and there was a ton of material.
Bruce, I think as managing broker, and I have agents that do commercial and deal with a lot, one of the things I think they all need to know is how to deal with the large amount of commercial brokers out there, especially the non-realtors, that are still doing things like an attorney should be doing, you know what I mean? Or they're putting the commission in the LOIs or the listing agreement. How do you, like when that happens with you, how do you explain to that other agent, well, you're wrong and this is the way we need to do it legally, right?
Well, if I get an LOI with a commission in it, I'm just going to call them up and say, we're going to respond and we're going to strike that, just so you know it. Send me a separate commission agreement or the terms that you want, and we'll draft the commission agreement if we're the listing broker, and send that to you so that there's a commission document between the two companies, and you can't sign it. Your managing broker has to, because, as I said earlier, commissions are between companies, not between individuals. Where some people are crossing the line and playing attorney or adapting documents, I'll point it out to them, but that's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to do. If I'm representing the tenant or the buyer, I'm just advising the attorney on my side, where we are, what's been done, what I think's been right and wrong, or where the line's been crossed. You can't tell somebody else how to do their business, or sometimes they get snarky and snippy because they think you're being overly aggressive and telling them what to do, and you still want good relations because you got to get a deal done.
They frequently will give the agents a hard time, like, well, you should do it this way because I'm a commercial and I know what I'm doing, and they're trying to get this agent that's doing maybe their first or second commercial deal.
Well, but that goes back to Article 11 and having an understanding and some knowledge about what you're doing. I'll get referrals for, I'll pick on nail salons. Somebody wants 1,200 square feet to open a nail salon, and then they want a referral fee. And I'm like, no, I'm going to pass on that. And they're like, well, you're the commercial person. And I said, if I gave you a referral for a $12,000 condo, would you be excited? Would you take it? They're like, no. I'm like, well, okay. It all comes down to, what's the time worth that we're investing, but this is my good friend. Well, then we have to tell her she has to pay a fee to get this done, because if you lease a 1,200 square foot space for 1 year, and then I split it with the listing broker, and then I split it with my company, and then I subtract out the gas cost that I've done to go to Palatine and show 11 things, I made $12.06. And I got to tell you, I'm not willing to do that. So sometimes it's how you politely phrase it, where somebody's arrogant or condescending, I think is more where you're getting to. I don't know. You just you just come clean and say, look, I'm trying to learn. I'm happy to work with you. If you want to run this transaction, please just keep me advised. Maybe it's easier if you do it because I don't know what I'm doing. I'd like to learn. I'd like to have you mentor me. Maybe massage their ego a little bit. Can you mentor me through this? Can you give me some advice? Send me the documents that you typically might use so that I can review them with the client and or their attorney or their advisors. I tend to use the word advisors as opposed to attorneys because not everybody goes to their attorney right off the bat. But, does that help you?
Well, it was more for helping them because
okay.
they're going to come across this. It's a weekly occurrence for me.
So true. Yeah.
That they will literally say, well, no, you write this, you add this, the language, like they want the agent to draft language to make the offer to lease or buy. And the answer is no. And they're like, well, we do this all the time. Just do it. And that's the kind of pressure you have to be. You have to be firm on knowing your license law, because a lot of the commercial people that are out there, not Bruce and not the good ones, they're operating the way it's been a Wild West show with paperwork and commercial for a long time.
In the realty world, we have code of ethics. We have a 4,000 person network around the metro area that, I won't say it's policing, but keeps us all right and proper. That same oversight doesn't necessarily happen in some of the commercial firms, and to the point, they're writing up commentary to real estate contracts where the attorney should be doing it. They're reading leases and making comments that they're sending back to not their client, but to the other side, saying here's the changes that should be done without getting approval from the client, because they're acting more as in commercial real estate, you may have an owner that's an LLC, and the members of the LLC live in Denver, Dallas, Detroit, and so you're the local broker, you're the one who's got hands-on, and they say, we're an absentee owner, you just deal with it, tell us what we need to sign. Well, we're not supposed to do that in real estate. That's not what our license law allows us to do. There are people who, in the commercial world, will do that all the time. And so they're passing on the obligation for the changes to the document to you, and you don't want to take that responsibility on. You don't want a paper trail saying you signed off on blah, blah, blah. So, and I would say, either My managing broker has advised us not to do that kind of work to the documents that are associated with this transaction, whether it's a sale or a lease. I would say that, or let's throw it back at them and say, I haven't done this before. How about if you make the changes that you think your client is going to want and send them so I can discuss it with my side? Mm-hmm. That throws the onus of changes back on them, and it keeps a cleaner paper trail for you when somebody might micromanage or scrutinize the paperwork that you've got.
Is this for a contract?
I would say it's for contracts, it's for leases, more so for leases. Yeah.
Attorney. Get an attorney.
Yeah. In your world, the attorney gets involved after you've written the contract. In my world, nobody wants to spend $3,000-$4,000 to their attorney until you know you've got the structure of a deal in place. So the brokers are the ones who are negotiating back and forth on sometimes the fine points of the lease terms or the sales activity, and that's why we're doing it in a letter of intent, which kind of walks a gray line, but it's not a legally binding document, so we tweak those going back and forth.
Yes.
Yes, that's done all the time.
We're okay, as realtors, okay, are we with that? But when it gets to the lease and then the actual legal terms, that's where I just kind of like, because I don't have
that would be a rider, just like on a residential, right?
Sometimes yes, sometimes not so yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can't draft a rider either, so.
Well, I don't draft the rider.
can.
I get whatever.
The attorney or the principal
Yeah.
can.
Right.
I get whatever's sent to me, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I have a consultation with the client and say, I can't draft this, but here's some points that you might want to send me an email outlining that we can add as an attachment at your instructions.
Good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got a quick question. If you can touch a little bit on appraisals for buildings and how do they work and any tips on that?
Good question.
Appraisals are an art or a science, in my opinion. We do opinions of value. You know, you can do a CMA in the MLS, and you're using comps from the immediate neighborhood for where you think the valuation of the property might be. There are some changes that happened in, I think, the 2020 laws that I don't understand why the MLS doesn't have the disclaimers in their CMAs that the state says you're supposed to have. So when I do a CMA, it's a custom document where I'm pulling the same information out of 5 or 6 databases and then aggregating it with a cover letter and all of my backup information. And you're supposed to have a map, and you're supposed to have demographics, and you're supposed to have a disclaimer and a disclosure that you're not part of the transaction. And the MLS doesn't, but that's a whole different story, and you and I can talk about that later. Because I happen to know you sit on the MRED board. But how do you work with appraisers? On commercial, just like residential, I'm there trying to give them as much information to help them get to the amount that the transaction is transferring at as possible. So I'm giving them all the comps that I used when I did my BOV, broker opinion of value, or BPO, broker price opinion, interchangeable terminology. I'm giving them any recent comps that may come up beyond that. I'm going on what other areas similar in demographics may hold. So where Deerfield may have 3 comps over the last 2 years, maybe I'm going to try and go a little further afield. Residentially, I think it's a 3-mile radius that you typically try and stay in, and I don't know residential appraisal rules that well. Mine might be a 10-mile, so I might be going to Hoffman Estates, or I might be going to Lincolnwood, or I might be going to Mattawa to try and find a commercial strip center that's sold so that I can get to the cost per square foot, that I can get to the NOI, and my gross and net numbers. I'm trying to help the appraiser with as much information as possible so that they can hone in on the valuation that we need to make the transaction happen. It's been easy the last 10 years because it's been plenty of transactions and ever-rising values and ever falling interest rates. In the last 6 months, with rates having taken this huge spike, and now you've got a big bid-ask sellers versus buyers gap that's developed. Sellers still want what they wanted a year ago, and buyers are saying, hey, have you looked at the NOI number? Have you looked at what my debt service is going to be? I can't pay you that number. How the appraisers can do a valuation, it's like catching a falling knife. So I find it much harder to understand how they're getting to values today when values are dropping. But I don't know that I have anything that's sagely that can help you other than give them as much information as you can. If you've got an old environmental, if you've got a survey, if you've got local demographics, if you've got zoning information, that's all things that they have to dig up. And if you can look like, you're a great broker because you're providing all of that, that's just helping them do their job. And I don't know to follow up 2 or 3 days after the appraisal and ask if there's a follow-up questions. Are they digging for anything? Let me help. And, I'm just trying to buy goodwill to get to the bottom line.
So I was a little surprised when I got an appraisal from a building that we're buying, and the appraisal said the building's worth $600,000, but if it's stabilized, it's worth $900,000, and stabilized, it costs $150,000. So I'm like, okay, so if I put tenants there, then it's worth $100,000, but if it's as is, it's $600,000. So I was kind of thrown away but the methods that they're using to come up with value nowadays in let's say in an office building or a commercial building.
Well,
So
adaptive
things
adaptive reuse, I think it'd be very difficult to value because you're taking an office building and gutting it and doing construction and turning it into an apartment building. You got to have an awful lot of contractor information to be able to get to that, what your construction costs are going to be to get to that post-renovated value. I think that if you're taking a half-vacant property, it's much easier to say, okay, it's a half-vacant apartment building. If you do the hallways, do new lighting, change the appliances, put in carpet, paint the eaves and the windows, and seal coat, stripe the parking lot, you suddenly have a completely different look to this property, and you can pop your rents by comparison $150, $200 a month. So here's the current cash flow analysis. Here's the pro forma that's going to take you 12 to 18 months to get to. And, will the lender lend you on the pro forma? Probably not, but somewhere in between, very likely. If you could help an appraiser where there's a value-added component and show them how we can get to the value, I think that goes a long way to helping them understand where your thinking is coming from and where, especially from the buy side, where the buyer's vision is to be able to get the property to.
In Chicago, it's becoming more and more popular, especially because of the housing crisis, that landlords that have mixed-use buildings are looking into turning their storefronts into those, what do they call them, the mullets.
Flex office.
Huh?
Flex office.
Not flex office. Business in front, home in the back.
Mixed
The
use?
city just
Mixed
approved
use?
putting in
Not mixed use. No, I'm talking about a specific storefront.
storefront in the city is mixed use, so it's
Not, but I'm talking.
It too, right?
Yeah.
live work.
Live work, yes. So I got, the storefronts are all sitting vacant. These are these old tiny looking things, and they want to turn them into, like art galleries and stuff. And then the artist lives in there. So I don't know much about it, but I've got like several clients that they got these storefronts that are dead. And I said, have you looked into this? From what I understand, you got to get the alderman's blessing. But I don't see that being, something that they would, right away dismiss because it would actually add value to the community. Is this something that's...
I don't know much about it. I know the city recently, last year maybe, changed some of the rules to allow that to happen. But I would make sure that the alderman's office, as you said, gives it your blessing because, to my comment of an hour ago, zoning is going to drive some of the uses. There's B uses, which is business, C uses that are commercial, I uses that are industrial, M are manufacturing. And if you're putting the wrong kind of business,
right? Because I looked
tenant,
up, it has the different zones, that it allows. So there's certain C zones or certain B zones that live work allows. So I told him, I said, well, it's on the list, but I think you got to get the alderman's blessing before you do anything. I says, if anything, if you wanted to jump ahead, if you wanted to do work and put in a shower stall, and a kitchen, I mean, it still would definitely be used for an office, but, then maybe it would sweeten it with the alderman, saying, hey, I'm really interested in doing this, but, it's still not converted yet for live work, but at least it'd be like, hey, I've got the intent, I mean, how would you pitch that to get that? You see what I'm saying?
Well, I might go to the alderman's office and talk to you'll never get to the alderman. Seldom get to the alderman. Probably get to their chief of staff or whoever's on staff that's connected with the zoning issues, and just say, this has been vacant for 2 years. The neighborhood is complaining bitterly about the vacancy in the community. This is one way to get a vacant storefront back to cash flowing, to bring additional business in. So somebody's going to stop at the 7-Eleven and buy, or get the grocery store. And there's cross spending that'll go on because you're generating foot traffic to come in, and perhaps sales tax revenue because the artist may be selling things and the city gets its percentage of money. And what will the alderman's office allow or bless, using your term, and just be frank about it and just say, the landlord's willing to put a shower in or upgrade the bathroom and include a shower and put a kitchenette in. What other components do we have to dot the I's and cross the T's on to make sure that we are compliant?
And would that still be considered commercial, or would it go into residential? Because, in the city of Chicago, you got to get a heating disclosure.
Well, I would...
On the lease, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. My MO is to sway by conservatively going with cover your assets, and I would just get a heat disclosure to have it. Now, will the utility company give you the heat disclosure because it's not on their books?
That's what I'm talking about.
And if they're not going to give it to you, then try and get a letter or an email from them saying that it doesn't, it's not necessary. So again, if anybody ever inspects your file, you've got a paper trail that says, I tried, I couldn't get it accomplished.
Okay.
And maybe even have it that the tenant and the owner sign off on that collectively.
Okay.
Someone's selling a building in Westtown with that, the box. If you want to take a look.
Yeah. I'll stick around as long as anybody wants. For anybody that needs to get in touch with me, my information's on the handout. I covered a lot more than I was expecting, and thank you all for being gracious and staying and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.